Another was that I was really interested in connecting artists in Milwaukee with all of the art worlds outside of Milwaukee in any way I possibly could. So it was all built into the structure of the program. There had been artist fellowship programs in Milwaukee in the past, but they were usually run by people in Milwaukee who made the choices. You know, the jurors were all local, and so everybody knew each other, which sometimes is great and sometimes has problems. So the Nohl program, we bring in the jurors from outside Milwaukee. Every year it's a new set of jurors, and it's a way of connecting those jurors to artists in Milwaukee. The opportunity to put your work in front of the eyes of 3 jurors is a great opportunity. These are people who might not see your work otherwise. And the opportunity for them to see that much art production from Milwaukee all at once makes sitting on a jury like this very desirable to them. So they're usually really interested to come and see what's going on. We also do a public exhibition as part of the program because we feel that people living in Milwaukee should know that artists live among them and are making work. So we're in the last week of the show down at the Haggerty Museum. You can go see Robin's work and the work of the other 4 fellows. Thursday night, Rose Curley, who's one of the fellows, is doing a stand-up comedy event as part of her exhibition. You're welcome to come to that. That's all free. The Haggerty is free. And then the Suitcase Fund seemed like another great way to get the work of Milwaukee artists out into the world. So that was all built in. And we didn't want it to be a project grant. We didn't want people to have to come up with a specific project. We just wanted to support them in their art making, preferably at a point where it would make a big difference to them. But let's face it, money always makes a big difference. So every year I do these workshops, and I should tell you that we did the first one this year down at Walker's Point Center for the Arts last week, and we videotaped it, and it's online should you want to subject yourself to the torture of watching this again. Like if you feel like there's a part you missed that might be in that one, you can go back and look. There are links on the website now to that. I always think the first workshop is the worst one because I'm trying to get myself back into the mental space of the Nohl Fellowship Program. But at any rate, it's out there. You can watch it. So I do these workshops every year. I do it for new applicants to demystify the process because we're interested in having all kinds of artists apply. I do it for people who've applied before and want to know why they should apply again. And I do it for those who have applied but have never come to a workshop and they're coming back in to find out maybe there's some things that would help them in this process. So as I said, probably the major reason to keep applying if you have applied before but haven't gotten the fellowship, which we all know is depressing. Rejection is bad, but the benefit is that you are putting your work in front of each year, you're putting your work in front of the eyes of 3 new curators. And we've seen over the years that certainly curators have gone on to form relationships with artists whose work they've seen in the jurying process, invited them into group shows, organized solo shows, and it's not always the artists who win the fellowship. So, jurors always see work in the pool that they really like that doesn't make it all the way through the process. And then they ask me for contact information afterwards, things like this. It takes many years sometimes for these things to come around because it depends how far out they're planning stuff. But it definitely happens, so I have to encourage you to do that. The other reason I encourage people to do this is that I think it's really beneficial to sit down once a year and think about your art practice. And fellowship applications, which are all pretty similar, are designed to help you do that. They have an artist statement where you think about how you want to talk about your practice. And then they have a work sample where you think about how you want to present your work visually. And once you sit down and do that this year, you can use it for other applications. But then when next year rolls around, it's really good to sit down and look at that and say, is this how I still want to talk about my work, or have things changed? And, would I show my work differently in a work sample now? So, there's tedium and rejection involved, but I think that there are also some beneficial things about continuing to apply over the long term. We'll talk about some of the changes to the program. They're pretty small changes this year. I don't think the online application has changed very much. It's old primitive self. We'll talk about the process, the guidelines, eligibility, definitions. We'll walk through the application and the components. Robin will be here to jump in and talk about some things about her experience of the process and of the fellowship. And we'll have time for questions. Feel free to ask me questions as we go along. If it's something I know I'm going to be talking about in 5 seconds, I'll tell you, and we'll just put it off. So the new things this year, we've reduced the size of the work samples. For those of you who applied before, it used to be 10 still images. We've taken that down to 8. Whether you're an established or an emerging artist, you can submit 8 JPEGs. For time-based artists, we've kept emerging artists at 5 minutes total of all their samples, and established artists we've cut down to 7 minutes. We do find that with the amount of work that the jurors have to see in one day, that it was getting to just take way too long to get through everything. So those are both shorter. If you're putting in a mixed sample, there's a ratio of how much equals how much, like what a slide equals. And I need to know if you're putting in a mixed sample, because I have to give you some special directions about that, and we can talk about that. And as I said, we're making small tweaks to the definitions and the parameters all the time. So if you are someone who's applied many years and you read it carefully this year, you will detect a few changes. I have some really basic advice for applying for this or for anything else. Be sure to read the guidelines carefully. There's a lot of repetition in them, but they're really important. And then read the application instructions really carefully. The ones that I've circulated, that are on the web, and then when you actually enter the application, there's instructions on each page of the electronic application, usually on the left side, but sometimes on the top. Please, please, please read the directions. If you have trouble following directions, as many of us do, read them in advance with somebody else. Make sure you're understanding them, and then maybe have that person check the things that you're planning to put in the application to make sure that you've gotten it right. I also always encourage people to work together. You're not really directly competing with each other in this whole process. And I think Milwaukee's a pretty collegial place, and people do things collaboratively. It's very helpful to have someone else read your artist statement or look at how you put your slides together, and I just totally encourage that. I recommend that you download the PDF of the application instructions, or take one today and follow along as you're doing it. Read all the directions, follow all the directions about font size and margins. They have practical implications. These jurors are locked in a dark room for a really long time, 12, 13, 14 hours. If your resume is this small, they're not going to read it. So, and if you don't put the correct margins in, we hole punch this stuff. There'll be holes through your resume. For people who are doing the paper application, your files have to be labeled appropriately. We can talk about that. Be sure you're paying attention to the formats, what you can upload as a PDF, what you can upload as a JPEG. It's very limited. This is a primitive application. Please don't scan your PDFs. They'll be too large. Just convert them in a program that does that. And the biggest piece of advice is don't leave this till the last minute. If everybody gets on the application at the same time on the last day, we can't vouch for its ability to handle it. Also, inevitably, if you've left it to the last minute, you're going to have questions. And I am a single human being, and I have a full-time job on top of this. And I can't guarantee that I can answer every last-minute question. I'm happy to help along the way, but that can be difficult. This is done, the Nohls Fellowship is chosen through what's known as a blind review. The jurors are not supposed to know who you are. So we ask you, and you'll see in the directions, to take off all identifying materials. So that can mean if you're a filmmaker, when you put your work sample together, you don't put the credits in. We don't want to know that this is your film. On your on your artist biography or resume, you don't put your name and your contact information at the top. It's uploaded to a specific place. If you're mailing it to me or handing it to me, I'm going to know who you are. We assign you, the electronic form assigns you a number. Everything comes in with your number on it. So it's not like we're going to lose track of who you are. There are a few places where you can use your name, and we'll talk about those when we get to them. Obviously, signatures on paintings, don't worry about that. They can't really read those. Sometimes people appear in their own work. If that's an inevitable thing, that's fine. They're probably not going to know who you are anyway. But do not make a piece of work that shows you on purpose for the purposes of identifying yourself. In the early years, we used to get videos where people would go, "Hi, my name is, and this is my studio." That can get you disqualified, so don't do that. When we get the jurors in, they come in the night of November 9th. They give a public talk at the Haggerty Museum, which I encourage you all to come to. It's really interesting usually. They talk about their home institutions. We have people coming from the Hyde Park Art Center in Chicago, from the Minneapolis Institute of the Arts in Minneapolis, and from a museum in Canada. So they'll talk a little bit about projects they're working on in their institutions. Then the next day, the 10th, we literally lock them in a dark room, and we start by doing a silent round where we just show all the work samples, one after another, in the order of the numbers that you've randomly been assigned when your applications came in. That means they're seeing videos mixed in with still images. It just happens to, however anybody applied. They watch the whole thing without seeing it, without saying anything, and then we go through and we do a yes/no round. They get to say yes or no about each one. If you get at least one yes, you stay through to the next round. If you get 3 no's at that point, you are out. And the only implication of that in the long run is that if you come to me for feedback afterwards, if you were eliminated at that point, I'm not going to have any feedback for you. But then we just go through, and we start with the established artists. So we go through round after round, narrowing it down, and the jurors at this point are talking, and we're trying to keep track of what they're saying to the best of our ability. And I should also say that while they're watching the slides or the videos, we are reading out the name of the work, the size, the materials. You'll see on the application there's a sheet where you give this information, and we read it out loud to them so they can hear it while they're watching. And then their goal is to come up with 7 finalists in the established category. And we try to get that done by 5 o'clock so that we can call you and tell you that you're going to have a studio the next day, Saturday the 11th, I believe that is. So if you're applying in the established category, you should give me a good number to reach you at, and you should be available on Saturday for that studio visit. We do studio visits in people's homes. We do them in people's bedrooms. You don't have to have an actual studio, but we do need to have a chance to visit with you and look at your work in greater detail. So we try to get that done by 5 o'clock to let you know. As soon as we get down to the 7 finalists in the established category, we start in on the emerging category. We do a silent round, we do the yes/no round, and we get them to the point where they've chosen 10 finalists in the emerging category. And at that point, we tell them a little bit more about the applicants, because they're not going to meet them in a studio visit, and we feel like at that point it's good for them to know whatever else we can reveal about those people from their applications. And then they immediately go from 10 down to the 3 winners. So that all gets done from the start of the day Friday to the end of the day Friday. It's a very long day. Saturday, we give them lots of caffeine and sugar to keep things going. So then Saturday, we go around and do 7 studio visits. And by the end of that day, they decide who the 2 winners in the established category will be. So everything's done by Saturday night. And then I try to, if it's not too late Saturday night, I try to notify the winners certainly Saturday night, and the finalists on Sunday if possible. Monday we send out letters to everybody. Everybody should get a letter telling them whether they, you know, if they'll know if they got it, but if they were a finalist or if they didn't make it this time. If you happen to move between the time you put your application in and the middle of November, let me know, because otherwise I'm not going to know where to send the letter. And then we make a public announcement to the press thereafter. So that's how that part of the process goes. So I'm going to just go through some guideline stuff. I think first of all, you can read all of this on the web, but there are things that I will reiterate about eligibility, and also I think what people are really interested in is, you know, what are jurors looking for in this process? And there are a lot of ineffable elements in this. You know, some of it is straightforward, some of it is not straightforward. I've certainly talked to a lot of artists in Milwaukee who've been making art for a really long time and are very accomplished artists, and they want to know why they haven't gotten the Nohl Fellowship. And generally speaking, you know, I have to say the jurors always tell me after this is all over that they're very impressed by the quality and range of the work they see in this process, and that they recognize that there are a lot of really accomplished artists in Milwaukee. But they're tending to look not just at accomplishment, though they're interested in that, but also for potential for greater accomplishment. And I think curators are really quite good at identifying artists from a fairly small amount of information who are perhaps at the point of making a big leap forward of some, or, you know, a significant change in their work. So I think they're often trying to figure out who those people are. And, you know, we talk about the fellowship being there to recognize visual artists who are making or will make significant contributions to their fields and who promote the arts in the region through continued excellence. So I think that they're looking at that kind of thing. They're looking at the aesthetic quality of the work submitted, their demonstrated commitment to artistic exploration of the art form. Exploration of the art form is really a big thing, I think, for this. I think they want to see that you're pushing some boundaries in your work. Those can be formal boundaries. Those can be commitment to expanding the social boundaries or audience for the discipline. I think there are a lot of different ways you can demonstrate that you are pushing boundaries. It doesn't have to be like, I'm going to break with everything I ever did before and do something totally new, but just how your work is moving forward. They look at your record of professional accomplishments or contributions to the field in your bio, and so on. So, I mean, I think these decisions are often, they're also informed by current trends in the contemporary art world. You know, it's not like these people aren't out looking at stuff all the time. I know that people who come to the juror talks sometimes come up afterwards and say, well, they're never going to pick my work because my work doesn't look like any work that they showed in any of the shows they put together. It's not how it works. They're interested in artists of potential of whatever sort. They're not putting a show together. They're choosing you to invest in your work for a year. So that's how that goes. The deadline for these applications is Thursday, October 5th, 2017 at 5 p.m. It's a Thursday, not a Friday. For some reason, everybody thinks it should be a Friday. It's a Thursday, and it's at 5 o'clock. We used to let this go on until midnight, but then we had to stay up till like 2 o'clock in the morning working on it. So at some point, I was like, wait, we can stop at 5. If you're mailing it, it has to be postmarked by October 5th or dropped off at Linden.
Is that postmarked by 5 o'clock?
No.
Just October?
Just as long as it's postmarked.
Okay.
Yeah, the 5th. So technically midnight. So like the postal people have a little extra time.
It's like your taxes.
Yeah, exactly. So eligibility, you have to be a professionally active visual artist. That doesn't mean you're going to earn your entire living from your art making. Many people don't, so don't worry about that. But you have to show that you're making work, that you're doing the things that artists do. You have to be an originating artist, so if there are confusions about that, not musicians, not dancers, not actors. You have to be living in Milwaukee, Waukesha, Ozaukee, or Washington County, and you have to have lived in one of those 4 counties for a year prior to the deadline for the applications. So if you moved here in the last year, you're not eligible. But if you moved here before October 5th, 2016, you are eligible. There are waiting periods. If you get it, we don't need to go into that. You cannot apply if you're a full-time or part-time student in a visual art related degree program. We feel that when people are in school, they're being reasonably influenced by the people who teach them. So we wait till people are out of school. You can be in nursing school, that's fine. You can, be in accounting school, that's fine, but not in visual art related fields. That would include film and video and certain other things. Definitions. So because of the size of the community here and the amount of money we have, we put everybody into one pot for the purposes of this application. If we were a bigger place, we'd have a separate panel for film video. We might have a separate panel for craft, but we don't. So everybody's in there together. And we consider the whole wide variety of media, traditional fine arts, film, video, installation, new media, to a greater degree performance art, we'll talk about what kind of performance art is considered as part of this. It is not intended for commercial artists, for musicians, theater artists, or others whose work is generally not presented in a visual art gallery / screening context. So if you're a performance art whose work is oriented towards the visual art context, then you are eligible to apply. If you are really a theater person who does solo performances that are shown in theater venues, then you are probably not eligible to apply. If you do both, you just have to make a good case for your connection to the visual arts field. And if you happen to be someone who works across disciplines, again, you have to make the case for why you're applying in the visual arts area. And if you have questions about that, we can talk. So established versus emerging. We've tried to get more explicit about this over the years because we ask you to decide if you're established or emerging. I would say that the bottom is that you have to have a minimum of a 5-year exhibition history or screening history, excluding the times that you were in school. And it has to be 5 years of a certain caliber, not coffee shop exhibitions, but recognizable places where people are seeing your work and responding to it.
What is there like a succession? Does it have to be 5 years ago, or maybe 5?
No, it can be no, because a lot of people go back to school and no. So 5 years total. Just don't count your school exhibitions. And then merit, which could include some combination of reviews, commissions, grant or fellowship awards, residencies, screenings, publications, and active collection of your work by individuals or institutions. We know it's just a reality of what the art world looks like nowadays, that there are very few individual artist fellowships out there. But you just need to make a case for the fact that you've achieved a certain level of recognition to be an established artist. Emerging artists refers to the state of your development and your professional accomplishment and recognition rather than your chronological age. We have emerging artists of all ages. But increasingly we're trying to limit the emerging category to people who are in the early stages of a career. That they're demonstrating significant potential listed under the established artist category. They don't have 5 solid years of exhibition history. But I think it's kind of a Milwaukee disease that people decide they should be an emerging artist for 25 years. So I would discourage that. Just because you haven't had a solo museum show in the 20 years you've been showing, just because you don't have gallery representation, doesn't mean that in the Milwaukee context you aren't an established artist. So, I think think of it that way, and see if you're really stuck. You can certainly get in touch with me, but in the end, we ask you to make that decision.
Explain a little bit about, I think a lot of them fall maybe in mid-career, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Because I think they get stuck.
Yeah.
If they have real guidance about it.
Yeah, and I think that there are a lot of mid-career artists in Milwaukee, and they're definitely not emerging artists anymore. They have you've emerged. You may have not, as I said, you may not have emerged into a world where you're showing in museums or, making a steady, if you've had a steady practice for a significant period of time, you are not emerging anymore. The other thing is that if you are an artist, who's had a 20-year photography career and then you take up ceramics, you can't apply as an emerging artist, with your ceramics. You're still an established artist, you're just using a different medium, so you can't go back. The other place where I think this gets a little bit dicey for people is that there's certainly a good number of people who apply off from their art making practice. Either they're raising children or they've had to move somewhere, where you can't get pencils or whatever. If you have a very interrupted career like that, there is sometimes a case to be made for why you're still an emerging artist, and that's fine. You're going to get a place to explain that. I'm not going to talk about collaborative groups unless there's a specific question about collaborative groups.
It's more like I would be the one receiving the money to organize the collaboration.
And it's
my vision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like a
Yeah.
project. It's not people you.
Right.
Yeah. That's fine. Just apply as an individual. So, as I said, September. Applications are coming in. Deadline October 5th, 5 p.m. Thursday. October through the rest of the month of October, the staff, which is usually me and one other person, goes through all the applications. We prepare all the booklets. We make sure that everybody's eligible, and we get everything ready for the jurying. The jurors come to town on the 9th. They give their talk. They come in. They do their talk. They do the jurying on the 10th. They do the studio visits on the 11th of November. We do all the notification. If you there's a whole new timeline that kicks in, but we don't really have to talk about that today. So did anyone have any other questions about eligibility? You have to have resided in this area for a year. You can't be a student. I think we talked about established and emerging. So application instructions. So in addition to reading the instructions in advance, maybe more than once, I strongly urge you to prepare all your materials in advance. Like, get your artist statement written and get your artist biography ready and have your work sample ready to go. It is a very clunky online application. It's a little frustrating to use. It's not really set up for you to do things on the fly. So, and also remember to save copies of everything you put up in that application, because those are going to be your only copies. So read the instructions, download them if necessary, and follow along. Prepare all your materials in advance, and then when you're on that page with the instructions, when you get to the bottom, there's a place where you can click to start the application, and that'll take you into the electronic application. If you run into any browser problems, email us right away. We'll try to help you with that. So as I said, the components of the application, the first page is going to sort of look like the electronic version of this. It's going to ask for your contact information. It's going to ask the eligibility questions, like, are you a student? The application is not going to tell you if you give the wrong answer. Like if you say, yes, I'm a student, which, really in theory disqualifies you right off the bat. It won't tell you, like, bzzz, you're ineligible. But I will see it when I go through it, and then I will probably contact you and say, are you really a student? Because if so, you're not eligible. At the very bottom of that page, there's a small section for collecting demographic data. This is only for research purposes. It's not connected in any way to your fellowship application. We just ask you the year you were born. We get you can make a gender choice among several choices, and you can click as many race, ethnicity categories as you want. And it's voluntary. You don't need to fill this out, but it's really helpful for us to understand who's applying. And from 2003, we've been tracking, to the best of our ability, this information about people. So.
I have a question. For the CV and the resume and everything, is there going to be like a separate thing to provide verification of all the stuff on this form, or do you guys like really go through any of that, or it's like a in-depth process?
I mean, I read every single thing that comes in. I read every resume. I read every artist statement. But I mean, I don't check out whether it's true or not. Every so often I'll see something that I have some question about. And like if I know the person, I'll call them up and say, is that true? But yeah, no, we don't have any verification system. So we're honor system. Do your best. So once you get through that first page, the next thing they're going to ask you for is an artist statement. We'll talk about that. Then your resume or artist biography, and finally your work sample and the indexes that explain what's in your work sample. Let me just take a little digression here. There's a save and return function on this application, but it does not. It's kind of counterintuitive. That's the only way I can describe it. So once you've submitted the first page with your contact information and your eligibility questions, it'll take you to a page which will show your applicant ID, which if you applied in the established category starts with an S and has 4 numbers, and if you're in the emerging category, it's an M and 4 numbers. You can change, you won't see your demographic information anymore, that goes away somewhere else. You can change anything on that page except your category, established, emerging. If for some reason you get halfway through this and decide that you really are not an established artist, you're an emerging artist, you're going to have to start a new application. But anything else you can edit, and everything can be edited. However, you are going to start seeing usually on the left side, sometimes on the top, a button that says Save. Do not press that button for routine saving. I know people of my generation, like we see a save button and we can't not press it. So there's usually a lot of dealing with that. The save thing is to allow you to leave the application and go off and do something else and come back. And what will happen is when you hit the save, you will get an email sent to you immediately, assuming you put in the correct email address, with a 6-digit re-entry code and a link to get back into your application. The difficult thing about this is that any text information you have added on that page will be lost. It's the anti-save function. The place where this gets most annoying is if you get to the end and you're filling out the work sample information and you've typed in the name of 9 things and the description and blah, 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 and I need to go, or 8 things, sorry. But I have 1 left. I have to go to my studio, get it, come back. If you hit save without actually having finished that page, you're going to have to re-enter all that stuff. So what you want to do is advance to the next page and then hit save, because then it will save everything you put in. It will save anything you upload. So if you've uploaded your PDF artist biography, or if you've uploaded any images, those will all be saved. But any typed information, gone, unless you go to the next page first and then hit save. So then you get your little code. You can get back in. When you go back in, it will take you not to where you left from, because that would be too easy. It takes you to the final editing screen, which shows all the components of the application, and you can navigate from there back to each section of the application. And every time you finish a page and you hit next, you will get an editing screen, and you can edit then, and at the very end you'll get another editing screen. So there's a lot of room for editing. But don't hit the save button to save. Only hit it because you want to go away. And never use the back arrow to navigate because your computer will explode. That's what I've been told. Okay, so we've gotten through the first page and the demographic information, and we've hit the submit, and we're going on to the next thing. Then you're going to be asked to upload a PDF of your resume or artist biography. We will talk about, we call it an artist biography because we have all kinds of people applying for this fellowship. Some people have academic backgrounds, so they have resumes. Some people don't. And as long as it's in list form, not narrative form, don't write the story of your life, just list, you know. That's all we need. Emerging artists can submit up to 3 pages of biography or resume. Established artists get 5 pages. You don't need to use them all. If you're an artist who has a resume that looks like this, that's fine. Nobody's going to hold that against you. Just put in what makes the most sense. And again, that will need to be converted to a PDF that's not bigger than 2.5 megabytes. And in the directions that, if you're looking at the ones that I passed around, it tells you like how the little green bar fills up when you upload it, and you'll know that you successfully uploaded it. You will never see it again because it's an upload and it goes into a database. So just try to make sure you upload the correct file. Every so often I'll get somebody, you know, like some clearly not the correct file, and then I will, if it's not the very last minute, I will try to contact you and ask you to replace that with something else. Then you have to, I'm sorry, you do the artist statement before you do the bio, I think. Nope, bio, I'm sorry, I can't read. Yeah, artist statement before that. Artist statement is, you get a maximum of 1,500 characters, including spaces. So that's like 300 words. We find that jurors don't want to know more than that. So you have to be pretty concise. I suggest you write this in a Word program and, you know, do one of those word count things where they say characters with spaces, and make sure that it's not more than 1,500 characters. Even so, the counters on these things are sometimes whacked, so you may upload it and be told that you have 3 over or something. Just fix that however you need to. That you'll be able to go back and edit because that's text you put in. Again, if you think you're going to have to leave the application, advance to the next page and then hit the save to leave the application so you don't lose that whole thing. Then you do the resume, and then you have to decide which work sample form to fill out. So for the choices are going to be in the left-hand column. It's either JPEGs for still images or video for time-based media. If you are submitting only JPEGs, click on that, and that'll take you to the work sample form for JPEGs. If you're submitting time-based media, click on that, go to that form. If you're doing a mixture of the two, you need to go to the time-based media one first, and then from there they'll let you navigate to the electronic one. Time-based media people, you have to put in a Vimeo link. But I think we only have one time-based media person here.
It would be mainly pictures. I would just want one time-based.
Yeah, so you'll fill that one out first. You'll need a Vimeo link, and there's a lot of explanation of that in the directions. On both forms, you get to, in addition to identifying the work and the year it was made, and either the scale or how many minutes it is if it's video, you get a box where you have 300 characters, including spaces, to talk about the work. So if you're putting up video, if there's a password on your Vimeo, be sure you put the password there, and you might want to talk about, if it's not a self-contained video, you might want to talk about what the relationship is to the whole video. So if you're showing 2 minutes of a 10-minute thing, you might want to explain that. And again, once that form is submitted, you'll be able to review it again. On the electronic image work sample form, you will also have these little 300 character boxes. So in both of these cases, this extra information is optional. It's totally optional. If the jurors can tell what they're looking at by looking at it, don't bother telling them what they're looking at. Like, you don't need to say this is a painting of a cat. They're going to be able to figure that out. What is helpful is you can discuss maybe how the work was made, the materials, the scale, or any contextual information that the jury may not be able to understand by viewing the image. And keep in mind, these are professionals who look at stuff all the time. They can tell a lot of stuff from looking, but if there's something significant about any of that, you can use that little box. If you keep it as short as possible, because we're reading these out loud, don't repeat things from one box to the next. If 3 boxes are all about the same project, just say, over the next 3 images are from blah, 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 if it's a series or something. But use them very sparingly and be as concise as possible. If you need help preparing JPEGs, there's some information in these directions, and then I also urge people to go to the Jerome Foundation website. They have really great information on preparing stuff. So, and then you'll get, after you upload all your work samples, so the other thing is when you're uploading the JPEGs, when you upload them, there should be a thumbnail that comes up. If you don't see a thumbnail, it didn't upload correctly, try again. When you go to the review screen, you will see nothing there. It hasn't gone away, it's just not showing you the thumbnail anymore. You can still change your mind if you decide you want a different image. You just go ahead and upload again. It'll overwrite what you had there before. But you will only see those thumbnails in the beginning. And because people ask me this every year, the thumbnails are in the nature of thumbnail square. That's not how your work is shown. It's shown in the shape it is. So, but if you don't see a thumbnail, it means it didn't upload. Get to all that. You'll get to a final screen for editing, and then you need to, when you're satisfied that the application is complete, you have to click the submission link on the left-hand side of the page under Next Step. If you don't submit, we won't get it. So every year we have people who just never hit the submit button. And if we catch you doing that, because we can see the back end of the application, so we don't know if you're still editing it, right? So sometimes we'll wait like 24 hours if it's not the very last minute, and we'll say, did you forget to submit? And then you can submit it. Once you submit, you should immediately get an email that has your application number on it, and it spits back the printout, the text portions of your submission, but not, as we mentioned, you won't see your images, you won't see your biography, things like that were uploaded will not appear. If you think you submitted and you don't get an email, contact us right away so we can figure out what the problem is, because you don't want to miss out. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the artist statement. I'm sorry it's so late. The artist statement and the resume and the work sample. Of those things, the most important is the work sample. They're making that first judgment on the work they're seeing. And a certain number of people are eliminated without them probably even looking at the printed materials, because they're just looking at your work samples. So put the greatest energy into your work sample. The next thing is the artist statement. They probably won't read that until they're a little way into the process. And the thing that's of least concern is the resume or the artist biography. So allocate your energy accordingly. So if you're new to writing an artist statement, I always like to quote something that no longer exists on the web, but the Claremont Graduate University used to have a writing center website with great stuff about writing artist statements. Becoming an articulate and effective writer can only benefit your art-making practice. It can help you invite others into conversation about your own work, engage critical discourse about art history and theory, or comment on trends in contemporary art. The part of that I think is really helpful is the idea of inviting people into your practice. You can think of the artist statement for the Nohl Fellowship as a chance for a direct address to the jurors, to tell them something about yourself as an artist, or the work that you have in your work sample. It's really important that your artist statement correlate with what you're showing them in the work sample. They're not really interested in very jargony, theoretical writing, unless there's some compelling reason why you're using that language to describe your work. It's fine to talk about your influences. It's fine to talk about personal things if it's relevant to your work, but you don't need to talk about anything personal if it's not relevant to your work. We also ask you, and this is mostly for filmmakers, if you're trying to complete a work in progress, you need to explain what new production will take place. Remember, this isn't a project rant. You don't actually have to describe a project. You can just say, this is what I'm working on. You don't have to say, I'm going to finish this by the end of the year. They do like to know what the future direction of your work is. It doesn't have to be super specific, but if you know, that's fine. It helps them decide what impact the fellowship will have. And then we ask you to put in the briefest possible explanation of why you chose to be in the emerging or the established category. So it could be super simple, like, I graduated from school 2 years ago, I'm an emerging artist. Or, I've been showing my work for 20 years, I'm an established artist. The people for whom it becomes more complex are the people who are in those situations we talked about where, you need to make a call about whether you're emerging or established, and you can just explain again as briefly as possible why you still think of yourself as emerging or why you feel you're established. But as brief as possible. You don't have a lot of room for this. Robin, when you did your statement, what were you thinking about?
I have a few tips here. So I think it's best to focus on aspects of your work that are similar to the work of other contemporary artists, and rather than focusing on how your work is different. If you're somebody who tends to resist certain trends in contemporary work, the contemporary art world, then you might be inclined to kind of focus on how your work maybe stands out or is different. But I think they want to see that you want to be part of the dialogue and that you're really contributing to that kind of national and global discussion. And so as long as you're telling them that you're aware of what's going on in the art world and that that you're not an island, that you want to be part of a bigger discussion.
Yeah, I think that awareness is that, today, and it doesn't have to be an awareness of contemporary art as one encounters it at Art Basel, for instance. It can be an awareness of the contemporary art world that you live in, that you have a community of artists that you are responding to, whether that's local or national or international or whatever. So I think they do want to know that you're not an island, preferably.
I think one year I applied and I talked to Polly, and she said that they said it seemed like I was kind of in my own world with my statement. And so I went in and revised it and kind of thought critically about how I was really engaging with, bigger issues that a lot of artists were interested in. And then that was really, next year I won, so that was really important. Maybe that helped.
Yes. We never know, really, what does it.
And then I suggested being, just as straightforward and clear as possible, because they do have so many statements to look through, so taking out any kind of abstruse language or anything that's, if they get confused, they might get annoyed, I imagine. And then, I find it's really good to write a few days before it's due, or even a week, and just let it sit and then go back to it just to double check that it's grammatically correct and that it makes sense.
Speak a little louder.
Oh, sure, I'm sorry. So those are the main things. And it's also helpful to keep in mind that you don't have to try to explain your work in the statement, but just give it a context. So,
Right, you don't want to tell them what to think.
right.
Because they don't usually want to be told what to think. I mean, you want to leave that conversation open, and you want people to come to your work with an open mind and interpret it. They don't want to be told what to think about it. So yes, creating a context for it helps them understand it. And I would say, one thing that's very confusing is if you seem to write about yourself as a certain kind of artist, but the work you're showing doesn't bear that out in a particular way. And when we talk about work samples, because you only get to put in a small work sample and you may have a very diverse practice, you may not be able to represent all the things you do in your work sample. So I would tailor the artist statement to the artist who made the work that's in the work sample, rather than trying to be too global about what you do if you can't represent it visually, because that is confusing to people. As Robin said, writing in advance is really helpful. Jessie McLean, another fellow, was at the workshop the other night, and she said, the first go, she just writes down everything. It's really long, puts it away, comes back, starts cutting it down. If you're not used to doing a lot of writing about your work, I suggest that you show the statement to at least 2 people. One would be someone who doesn't really know anything about art, and see if it's clear to them. If they don't understand what you're talking about, you are probably not being very clear, and I would go back and make it clearer. And then I would also share it with someone who's pretty familiar with your work, because sometimes we're really close to our work and we have a particular way of thinking about it, but it doesn't necessarily convey to the larger world. So having someone, say, I think maybe you could, it's like Robin coming to me after the time she applied, and I could tell her that statement sounded very insular and very, like you were only thinking about the things that went on in your studio. So it is helpful to have other people read it. I would also read it out loud. It really helps to hear your writing, to see if it sounds okay. And it doesn't have to be super, super formal. Some people, one of the fellows suggested not writing anything too poetic, because they had sat on a lot of juries, and if you get a really poetic statement, it can sometimes be frustrating because you don't know what the person's talking about. On the other hand, if you're a really accomplished writer and you can produce something that is really great and moves the jurors, by all means, go ahead with that. But anyway, get it done ahead of time, make sure it's the right length, and then you can upload it, then you can paste it in very easily. The artist biography, as I said, least important part. We only need to know about the things relevant to your artist life. We don't need to know your other employment or anything like that. This is one place where your name might appear, because if you have a section where you have exhibitions and your name was in the exhibition title, go ahead and put it in. I go through with a Sharpie and cross all that stuff out. Though if it's possible also to say, solo show, that's fine too. We'll all know what you're talking about. But if your name is integral to something like that, leave it in. If you have it, if people have written about your work and you're citing that work and your name is in the title of the review or the article, you can leave that in, and I will take care of that. But otherwise, nothing up on top. And again, follow the margins and the font stuff. You don't want to make life hard for the jurors. You want to take every impediment out of the way when it comes to dealing with your work. And as I said, we don't have formal requirements around the biography other than that it be in list form and not in narrative sentences. If you're interested in how to prepare a professional artist resume, the College Art Association website has a lot of great information on that. We have the link on our website, but it's really not a huge deal, and it's the last thing that they look at, and lots of times they don't even look at it. They tend to look at it when they have a question about the person whose work they're looking at, and you know, first they'll look at the artist statement to see if that helps them, and then they'll be like, and then maybe they'll look at the resume to try to get a sense of how long this person has been making work, or you know, what other kind of recognition they've gotten. But we also always have funny situations. A couple of years ago, a local artist who was a Nohl Fellow several years ago, Paul Drucca, was applying again, and he had been in the Whitney Biennial, and he did these plaques that were in the entrance to the Whitney Museum, and he had a picture of them in his work sample, and the jurors went, "Oh, isn't that funny? That artist made a piece of work that makes it look like his work is in the entrance to the Whitney Museum." So then we go, well, maybe you should look at his resume. So we try to watch out for people that way.
Do you, oftentimes I find them to be too long, do you have a recommendation? And College Association website is excellent for many things, but I think, do you have a recommendation as far as paragraphs, and the most should be more than a page?
Well,
paragraphs.
we have limits. Like, we'll take up to 3 pages for an emerging artist and up to 5 for an established artist. You certainly don't need to put that much in. If you can get it all in on a page, groovy. For those of you who have really long exhibition histories, things like that, just show selected shows. You know, selected solo exhibitions. You know, recent exhibitions. You know, you can allude to the fact that you've been exhibiting since 1901. But I'm just showing my recent ones. You know, because they're not going to wade their way through everything. So think about what's most important and put it up there. So now the whole heart of the matter, the work samples. This is where I have all these little notes. So all work samples should be of good quality, with well-focused and well-lighted images, or with clear video recordings. Please do not send any originals, because we can't handle that, but we can talk about your work. Quality of the image is super huge. I mean, I've seen artists whose work I know in real life is really great, and the quality of the images is not good, and they just fall out of the running really fast. You know, the iPhone has been a blessing and a curse, because everybody feels like they can document their own work now by just taking a photo. And some people are great at it and can do it. If you think that you would benefit from having a professional document your work, and I think there's at least one professional in this room, you know, who knows how to light the work and to make sure it looks good, it's a really great investment to invest in getting your work documented. This is the one place where jurors don't give any leeway, because they're so visually oriented. If it's an image that they don't understand easily because it's not a good image, they're not going to be interested. You know, I would avoid leaning your picture up against a chair and having your catwalk in front. That kind of thing. I'm going to talk about this primarily from the standpoint of people who are putting in still images, because that's what most of you are doing. All of you can put in 8 of these images. I would think of those 8 images as a way of establishing a kind of narrative arc or story, not just about the specific work you're showing, but about the kind of artist you are. You know, how you handle materials or subject matter or context or something, so that they understand what they're looking at across the 8 slides. I would highly recommend that you have a very strong first slide, because this will wake them up and make them want to look at the next 7 slides. And then what you need is a very strong final slide, because that's when they make a yes or no decision, when they get to the end. So if you've just knocked them out with a great 8th slide, they're much more likely to say yes than no. though the maximum number of slides is 8, you can put in as few as 6. You cannot put in less than 6. But if you only have 6 good slides, just put in 6 good slides. Do not put in 6 good ones and 2 weak ones. It will undermine what you're doing immediately. If you make very distinct, different bodies of work, be pretty careful about, if possible, finding a way to intersperse them in that narrative arc, because what happens is if they see 4 slides of blue pots and then 4 slides of paintings of cats, they're going to think they're seeing 2 different artists. And even though we're telling them, this is all artist S5717, your brain can't process that. So think about ways to show your work where you draw maybe from different bodies of work, but to explain what kind of artist you are. Or if you've work that looks really similar, it's sometimes really easy for them to respond to that. You can use details. I think a good detail can come in very handy if there's some visual information you want to get across, like maybe the surface of a painting, or if it's a sculpture. Again, these people are really good at thinking 3-dimensionally, but if you think you need 2 views of the sculpture, that's fine. But just remember that all of these count towards your 8-slide total. There are almost no situations where you need more than 2 slides to document a work. The exception probably being installations, and if you're only documenting installations, we let you, as long as you document at least 2 installations, 2 separate installations, you can, use 4 slides for each or whatever you want. By installation, I don't mean the fact that it's hung in the gallery. I mean, some planned thing where you've put all the work together in a specific way. Installation shots of gallery shows are a complete loss. All they see is little squares on walls. They can't see anything. They're not interested in that. So let them engage as intimately with your work as possible.
So the one piece that would be a video isn't actually a piece in and of itself. It's more of a documentation.
Right.
Does that affect like having 7 images and then like 1 video? Like, does that change the?
You'll get if you do 7 images, then you'll get a certain number of seconds for that video.
Okay.
However, one thing I would say is that even for performative things, if you can document it with a still image, you're often better off.
Okay.
Because you have that little box underneath where you can explain what's going on. And I think sometimes, a good photograph that gives the context of what you're doing. The problem is because we put filmmakers in the same pool with non-filmmakers, if you're using videos strictly as documentation, again, it's mentally confusing to the jurors. They're like, am I watching a video? How come it doesn't have the production values of some of the other things I've seen? So, and again, we can tell them what they're looking at, but it doesn't mean that they necessarily get that. So, if you make kinetic sculpture, just put in still images. Certain kinds of performance, I think you're better than a video. There's a mental shifting of gears too when you go back and forth between video and still. But if you think there's a compelling reason to include it, just box underneath saying this is documentation of a performance or something.
Would scale be something that you'd want to put underneath?
So, I don't know what kind of work you make.
Sculpture.
Sculpture, yes. Scale's really important. There's a place where you can put in the dimensions, image where there's something that, for reference, that lets them understand the scale. It can be very helpful. So yeah, anything that will help them understand what they're looking at, I think is extremely important. Did you want to talk a little bit about what you did with your work samples?
Yeah, I'm a painter, so I included 10 images. I think there was one, I think it was an installation shot, but it was a person standing next to the painting to give a sense of the scale.
Yeah, that was a scale shot.
Scale. Yeah, I spent time just making sure that the lighting was really good and they were really high quality.
And when you thought about the order, what were you thinking about?
I did think that I want to show them a really strong one for the first one, and then last one should be really strong. I think I have different series that I drew from, and I decided to break that up a little bit too, so it didn't seem too.
Right. So it wasn't chronological.
It was nearly chronological. It was just a little bit off.
So some fellowship programs, you have to put the work in chronologically. We don't limit you to that. We do ask that that for emerging artists, that all of the work needs to have been created since October 2015. If you have a compelling reason why all the work isn't going to be from that recently, just get in touch with me and tell me. There are sometimes reasons why. And for established artists, you can go back to 2012. But jurors are most interested in your most recent work, because if they're trying to decide, how you're going to benefit from a fellowship, they want to know what you're doing now and how that's going to be what you do next. So if you're an established artist, your goal is to get them to come and do a studio visit, and then you can show them whatever you want to show them. But the more recent the work, the better. And again, as I said, because you only have these 8 little slots, you're not going to be able to show the full breadth, maybe, of everything you do. You have to be selective, and sometimes that means presenting yourself in a more limited way than you may think of yourself. But as long as that corresponds to how you speak about yourself in your statement, I think you can make a good case to the jurors about what kind of work you do.
And the first image I showed was the most recent, and then the last
Yeah.
one was the oldest. So, yeah.
How many different groups did you make? Or how many different versions of your 8 did you make?
Well, you mean in the series?
No.
When you came to your final decision, was it like 3? Was it like 12?
How many times did you have to shuffle it to
right,
get?
right. I think maybe a couple times, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, her work, they're all paintings, and the subject matter is pretty similar, but the way she handles the subject matter is different. So, I mean, she's working in a somewhat more coherent universe than a lot of artists are. We get artists who work very conceptually, and every piece they make looks completely different and maybe in completely different materials. That's fine, as long as you can sort of make a case across your 8 slides about what compels you to make the work you make, why this happens to be a painting, this happens to be a sculpture, whatever. I think they can understand that. So, any other questions about artists, the work samples? And all the stuff about the sizes and the formats is up on the website.
Would year be something important to put with the details too?
The what?
The year created.
So the way that page looks, you get to fill in, I mean, this would be the printed out version. You get to put in the title of the year, the materials, the dimensions. Everybody gets that. And then that's your little 300 character box. So, yeah. But yeah, whatever you can do to help them understand your work. That's what you want to be doing there. So, and I'm not going to talk about the time-based media stuff. We have some, did anyone who came in later, is anyone doing time-based media, video? All right, we're not going to talk about that because there are a whole lot of issues around that. So those are the main components of the application. I would just end up by saying, I'm going to end by asking Rob to talk a little bit about the impact of the fellowship and asking your questions. But I want to let you know that if for some reason you can't use the online application, I have paper applications here. If you have questions and you want to get in touch with me, preferably use email. My email is all over everything. And put Nohl Fellowship in the subject line so that I get a ton of emails, so it helps me get to it faster. The deadline is October 5th. I urge you to come to the remaining activities. We have, in addition to Rose stand-up performance this week, both Rose and Jessie McLean are giving artist talks at UWM this fall, and Jessie's doing a screening at the Union Cinema. So, and then when June rolls around, maybe some of you will be in the opening of the next fellowship exhibit as fellows. But if you're not, I urge you to come, because if you don't come to other people's openings, they won't come to yours when you get to be a fellow. So support each other. And we always appreciate feedback about the process, so feel free to contact me about stuff like that. So before we take any other questions, do you have any last words about the impact of the program that you?
I'll just say that of course the money is really extremely helpful and it's really great, but for me it's been nothing compared to getting to show at the Haggerty and the people, the arts professionals that you get to meet. They bring in arts professionals from outside Wisconsin to do studio visits, and that's been extremely helpful. And getting to meet the other fellows. I got to meet Beth Lippman, who's an artist working with a similar subject matter, and we did a discussion about still life, and so that was a wonderful opportunity to
every
get to
fellow
know.
does a public program, and so Rose wanted to do stand-up comedy. We worked with Robin to set up a panel with Beth Lippman, so we do all kinds of different things.
And you get to ask a writer
Right.
to write an essay, which is really great. So I met the curator at Lawrence University, and so that's another great connection. It was really wonderful to read her perspective on my work.
So, questions? Happy to answer, yeah.
I just feel totally mystified as to if I should apply as emerging or established. Like, I've been very involved in the art scene since probably 2011, but I don't know, like, where do I draw the line? Like, I've had a couple of solo shows at Gallery 2622. Is that, like, a gallery?
Yeah.
Or is that, like,
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you think that, so that's 6 years since 2011, right?
Uh-huh.
And if you feel like throughout that time you were operating at the same level,
Mm-hmm.
or if you feel like the first 3 years you were doing like lesser things and then it revved up at a certain point.
Well, I was doing very different things.
Yeah, I know that's also confusing,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I mean, so I say you are clearly right on the cusp there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think if you can make a case for why you think of yourself as established.
Is there less competition for established?
It's, it's funny, the two pools are almost always the same size.
Mhm.
Last year, I feel like all of a sudden, or the first year we went, the year before, or the first year we went down to 5 fellowships, a lot of people had applied in the established category forever, knocked themselves back into the emerging category because they figured there were 3 fellowships available so they'd have a better chance. I don't know. So the competition tends to be about the same in terms of numbers. You sort of have to look around and think about who else would be applying. And to some extent, you can look at who's won in the established category before and decide if you feel like that's, because you are really right on the...
One thing, Ayzha, I do know that there are some critical writings out there about you, and that can make all the difference in the world, I think.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of articles.
Yeah, so I think that'll help you make your decision.
Okay.
Yeah, especially if they're enough interested in your work to read your bio. That's the tricky part. And yeah, so and we were talking about this at Jazz Gallery when we did one of these on Sunday. Your aim in all of this is to leave them wanting more. So like, oh, I'm so interested in this, I need to know more. So if you're an established artist, I need to go do a studio visit so I can find out more about this person. Or if you're an emerging artist, I am so interested in this and where this might be going that I'm going to give them the fellowship. So there is something about a kind of open-endedness that I think conveys well to the jurors sometimes.
I did have another question about applying. Would it be recommended to apply if you're just out of school and you're trying to get into things like this and you don't have much experience?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's great. First of all, it's great to put your work in front of those jurors, because they may be interested in your work on its own, whether you're just out of school or not. Yeah, so and it's also good practice. It really is. But yeah, and we get tons of people who finish school in May and apply in the fall. I think that's fine. Other questions? Anything I can help with? Robin can help with? Well, did everybody sign the sign-in sheet? Wherever that is. Thank you all, and good luck, and I look forward to seeing your applications. And
Please get some food and take a banana, orange, apple, whatever you want.
you're welcome.
Could I get one of those applications?
You want a paper one?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Let me sign up. I didn't sign in.
Oh, sign up.
So I'm going to catch up with you before.
There's the application. If you can do it online, it's best to do it online. This is the paper application, which is slightly different. But if you have to do it in paper, that's fine. Just follow
Just
these.
mail it in? Or?
Yeah, you just mail it in or you can drop it off.
Okay.
And
So if we're connected to the email list, then we'll get announcements about when those shows in June are and
Yeah,
the
you
other
should.
shows that
Yeah.
you're associated with?
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And Richard, I'm gonna give these to you. But again, if people can apply online. So we should talk about what to do about your images.
I may have some slides.
Oh,
Okay, so ready.
all right. So I know I use the word slides. I use the word slides.